For today's tasting, I'm really excited because I think I've got a very special wine to show you. The wine concerned Chateau Smith Haut Lafitte. It's their red. This is the 2009 vintage of that. So this is a wine, a Grand Cru Classé from Pessac Leognan. So the northern part of the Graves region, lying just outside Bordeaux to the south and southeast of the city. Now, the highly influential American wine critic Robert Parker famously gave this wine a perfect score of 100 points, making it the first wine from Pessac Leognan, other than the wines of Haut-Brion and La Mission Haut-Brion, to receive that accolade in one of his reviews. And he praised this vintage of this wine as being extraordinary, saying it was the finest ever made at the estate. And this review coming at the time it did, when the Cathiards had owned Smith Haut Lafitte for 20 years and had invested so much money and so much energy into propelling the wines from this property into the highest echelons of Bordeaux's wines. This really does seem like the culmination of all those efforts. So as I say, the estate is located in Pessac Leognan, so we're on the left bank of the River Garonne, and it's believed that grapes have been grown on this site since 1365. The chateau takes its name from the gravel plateau that it sits on, a Lafitte, hence the fact that you'll see the name Lafitte in a number of estate names, principally Lafitte Rothschild. So there's no implication of shared ownership between these estates, simply the same derivation of a chateau name. But then in the 18th century, a Scottish wine merchant, George Smith, who owned the estate, built the manor house on this site in Pessac Leognan and added his name to that of the estate. Now in 1958, the chateau was bought by the Louis Eschenauer company, and they've invested quite heavily, both in revitalising the vineyards and re-equipping the cellars. The following year, in 1959, the classification of the Graves region took place, and Smith Haut Lafitte Rouge was classified as a Grand Cru Classé de Graves. The white wine from the property, however, was not afforded that title, although today, were the classification redone, I'm sure it would justify it. Now, it's since 1990 that Smith Haut Lafitte has been owned by Florence and Daniel Cathiard. And this dynamic couple have invested really heavily, with the very clear aim of making their estate one of Bordeaux's finest. And as I say, the success of the 2009 vintage really is quite symbolic of them having gone a long way to achieving this goal. Now, as far as the vineyards are concerned, Cabernet Sauvignon is the main planting, somewhere in the region of 60 to 65%, with Merlot comprising about another 30%, and then Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot comprising much smaller percentages of the vineyard. The vineyard is 78 hectares in total. It sits surrounding the chateau, and it's farmed entirely organically. And there is a very strong organic and ecological philosophy behind the way that the estate is run. The plateau on which the chateau sits is a low hill made up of stones and pebbles that have been deposited over the years by the Garonne River. And these gravel soils act both to give excellent drainage, which Cabernet Sauvignon in particular loves, but also there's a quartz element in the gravels that reflects both sunlight and heat back to the plant to aid fruit ripening. The average vine age here in 2009 was a creditable 38 years, high proportion of the vines in the vineyard being fully mature. As I say, the vineyards are farmed organically. For instance, they make all their own compost. Horses are used to plough in the most fragile areas of the vineyard, although they do make the point that that tends to be where the white grapes are grown, so maybe not so involved in the production of this particular wine. And the various biodiversity efforts that they've implemented include the siting of beehives around the property. They also note that they have their own vine nursery, although that's not actually connected directly to the estate. It's on the Ile de la Londe, sitting in the River Garonne. Now, just to talk about the 2009 vintage, 2009 was a superb and generous vintage. The first of two fabulous vintages, 2009-2010. Temperatures were close to those achieved in 2005, so actually that's an even temperature without too many heat spikes. And rainfall was similar to that of 2000. And really, I don't think you're going to get much better indications of quite how good the vintage is than those parameters. Now, although the summer was dry with beautiful sunny days, the nights were cool, and that enabled the ripening grapes to preserve both their acidity and their more delicate aromas. And credit is given in the producer's notes to to the work that's being done in the vineyards here to ensure equilibrium in the vines, and the fact that they're deep rooted, for the fact that in dry conditions the vines continued to prosper in 2009. And the equilibrium was such that actually they see the vines as stopping their growth cycle and diverting their attention to ripening the fruit on the 20th of July. That allowed a lovely long ripening period. And I think it's typical of the estate and the meticulous work being done that they've actually observed and noted that. And Smith Haut Lafitte used a system called EnoView of satellite imaging to build up a row by row picture of how the grapes are ripening in their vineyard. And that enables them to organise picking crews and all the equipment they need to be able to pick at exactly the optimum time for the fruit to be in the condition that they want it to be, and thus to gain uniform ripeness across the whole harvest. Now, harvest began on the 25th of September. That started in the younger plots of Merlot, so more likely fruit at that stage that would be going into the second wine. And harvest finished on the 14th of October with the Cabernet Franc. All the grapes were harvested by hand, and the estate talks about having an absolutely enormous picking team. They had over 100 pickers. Average yields across all the lots that were picked came out at 34 hectolitres per hectare. Now, grape processing at reception involved two new technologies. First of all, optical sorting, and then destemming by means of vibration. So the Vitalysis was an optical system that ensured that any fruit that was undersized, underripe or damaged was identified and removed from the harvest. Now, I understand the vat room had been recently renovated, with the operations working entirely by gravity. All of this geared for gentle extraction to give greater control. The number of vats had been increased, but their size had been decreased to allow greater flexibility to ensure that all the individual vineyard plots could be vinified separately. The vats were small oak vats with temperature control to enable fermentation to go on at 28 degrees Celsius, and the berries all went into the vats completely whole, with extraction being achieved by manual pigeage, so literally pushing the cap of skins that floats up during fermentation back into the fermenting must and wine. So with that whole berry fermentation, you'll get almost a sort of a semi-carbonic maceration, a very gentle extraction, emphasising colour and aromas, but allowing just the tannins that are desired to be selected from the fruit. Now, the blend for the 2009 was predominantly Cabernet Sauvignon, about 2/3, 64%, with 30% of Merlot, and the balance being made up with 5% of Cabernet Franc and just 1% of Petit Verdot. The wines went on to age in Smith Haut Lafitte's capacious underground barrel store, where the wine aged with its lees for 18 months. The wine aged in French oak barriques, and the notes I've seen suggest that 65% of those were new. They also make the point that 65% of the new barrels had been made on site by their own cooper. So I may have gone into quite a lot of detail here, but I think that really just underlines the meticulous work that the Cathiards have put in, both in the vineyard and in the winery, to give their winemaking team the ability to make the best possible wine. So having said all that, I really ought to taste it, shouldn't I? Now, looking at the wine, it has an incredible depth of colour. It's losing almost no colour to the rim. Some of the producers' notes say that as the fruit came in for fermentation, it was almost inky black in colour, and this is still dark, deep, it's completely opaque. The wine is labelled having 14.5% alcohol, and certainly you can see, even before I swirl it, there were viscous tears forming on the side of the glass. There are certainly plenty of those. Swirling the wine to release the aromas, I'm not sure that I even need to do that, because as I was holding the glass here, I could smell bold, fresh Cabernet Sauvignon aromas, and they're certainly coming out here again, although there are plenty of other complex notes as well. Notes really are of cassis, more cassis than blackberry, and that's beautifully married with cedary notes. There are notes that are very classic for Bordeaux, notes that are referred to as sort of lead pencil, so a combination of both cedar and graphite. There are perhaps some more sort of rich red plum notes sitting alongside those, right at the core of the wine. And there are high-toned spices coming from the oak. There are notes of cinnamon and nutmeg. There is quite a classic sort of maybe slightly dusty note to the whole thing, typically Bordeaux, sort of framed by the oak notes, so just slightly keeping those bold primary fruit in check. So let's have a taste. The wine is concentrated, but doesn't seem huge. It has a very good fresh acidity that comes through right from the outset and is giving some fabulous definition and finesse to the wine. There's this beautiful blackcurrant note right round the edges of my tongue. I can feel the acidity making me salivate, and it is just lifting fruit notes all around my tongue. There's a licoricey, graphite density to the fruit on the middle of my tongue, with notes of blueberry, that really concentrated elderberry. Again, as I say, all overlaid by graphite notes. There's so much going on in this. Now, I mentioned the fact that the label says that the alcohol in this is 14.5%. But really, beyond a sort of a slight warmth at the back of the palate that is perhaps showing up some sweet spice, nutmeg and cinnamon notes, there really isn't very much indication of that acidity at all, because it's so well balanced by this concentrated yet amazingly elegant fruit. This really is an exceptional wine. Its colour and its density suggest it's still a young wine, yet its fine grainy tannins have a ripeness and a smoothness. Although they provide good grip, they're not providing astringency. Rather, it's sort of ripe tones, black cherry, that sort of thing, that are left on the finish to complete the palate. There, of course, they're being supported by that superb line of acidity that runs right through the fruit. On the nose, I was talking about the oak keeping the fruit in check. On the palate, the fruit has managed to overwhelm and absorb the oak and bring it along with it, helping make the mid-palate lovely and lush. Notes I've seen suggest that this is a wine that's likely to carry on drinking until at least 2050. And such is its concentration and elegance that I completely agree with that. I guess the question I haven't answered is, do I think that this is a 100-point wine? I certainly don't have any trouble scoring this above 96, somewhere in the region of 98. And actually, I guess by the time you've reached that score, it's very difficult to deny a wine with such beauty, such lovely intensity, the extra 2 points that would take it up to 100. Certainly, I've tasted the 2008 vintage of this wine recently, and that was a wine that was no slouch, but this really does leave it standing. Such is its elegance, its precision, the finesse of its tannins, the focus that's provided by its acidity. Very clearly, this is an exceptional wine. I'm not sure whether I would have had the confidence that Robert Parker did to award this with 100 points, but I'm certainly not going to dispute that it deserves that score, because drinking this is a truly incredible experience. I should probably say that currently the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine, taking into account those scores of other critics, has this with a score of 95. That I do think is unfair for the wine. Tasting this has been an incredible experience, and I do hope you've enjoyed watching, so thank you so much for joining me. I will of course leave a link to the webpage on the Wine Searcher website for this vintage of this wine, so you can see if it's available in your market and at what price. And I suspect you'll find it's not a cheap wine, but to my mind the quality of this wine is exceptional, and therefore perhaps it does go beyond the bounds of the normal reckoning for pricing. So please, if you've enjoyed the tasting, do press the like button. If you'd like to watch more of these tastings, do please consider signing up and subscribing to my YouTube channel. That would really help me to develop the channel further. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, please feel free to pass it on to them. I'd really appreciate you doing that. And if you have any comments, either about the wine, the tasting, Robert Parker's 100-point score system, do please pop those in the notes below. I'd love to hear what you think about what I'm doing here. So thank you once again for joining me on this blustery day, and I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another video tasting sometime in the near future. Till then, bye for now.